to compete in the global tech landscape has declined, despite having a lot of talent and a very rich startup ecosystem. And it's about more than just the technology. There are various reasons why Europe might be lagging behind the US, lagging behind China. And fingers are pointed at a number of different places, whether it is lack of capital growth, lack of innovation ecosystem, too much red tape, too much regulation, talent or talent drain, culture. And I think it's important to understand what these factors are, to understand them and identify them in order to make the most appropriate interventions, policy decisions to enable Europe to catch up and be competitive again on the global stage. Now, each of our panelists today has a different perspective on this innovation challenge, on the areas that pose the greatest challenge and the areas in which we should be focusing our attention to bridge this gap. Yossi Vardi, chairman of 4 Years From Now, has 50 years of experience in co-founding, leading, and helping to build more than 85 high-tech companies. Jackie Abitbol leads European activities as managing partner of the Cathay Innovation Fund at Cathay Capital. And Peter Salin is co-founder of Silo AI, now AMD Silo AI, Europe's largest private AI lab. And they will be joining us now for this panel session on addressing Europe's innovation gap. Please join me in welcoming Yossi, Jackie, and Peter to the stage. This one's yours, Yossi.
Thank you very much.
Welcome, welcome.
Nice to be here.
Grab a seat, make yourselves comfortable. Here we go. So, thank you very much for joining us. We framed the conversation right at the beginning there, so I'm keen to dive in. And Yossi, I'll come to you first of all. Now, we were chatting just before about how best to manage this session, and you wanted to do a show of hands to the audience about how brutally honest you would like us to be in this conversation. So I will let you do that show of hands.
Okay. So we are going to dwell on something which is quite sensitive. We have two modes that we can run the session. One is to be very nice, very polite, and politically correct. And the other one is to be very honest, but this comes with a price of being offensive, aggressive, and not pleasant. And we need to know which mode the crowd prefer. Do you want us to be politically correct or honest? Those who want us to be politically correct, raise your hand.
I'm seeing no hands. I'm seeing one hand over there. Just the one hand so far.
Okay. And, we should give a round of applause for the courageous person which voted for politically correct. and who think that we better be honest, though painful? Raise your hand.
Wow.
So I think we have one person for politically correct, about 20% for honest, and about 80% which don't understand what I'm talking about or don't understand my accent. Okay, back to you.
Well, so I think that helps to frame what it is that people want from this, an honest discussion. Let's see how brutal that is with the honesty. But Yossi, I still want to come to you first on your views. You have a global perspective, a global view on this, and a lot of experience. You've seen the wheel turn a few times on this. Where do you think Europe would do well to focus its efforts? You know, we've spoken about nurturing this innovation ecosystem and growth capital or lack of. Where do you think we should be turning first of all to try and kickstart Europe Inc. as a global player?
First of all, we have to remember that you go back 60, 100 years ago, 200 years, most of the innovations of the world, of technology, as we know, as we call technology today, came from Europe.
Yep.
you know, energy, transportation, electricity, etc., came from Europe. Somehow, in the last half a century, Europe lost its momentum. We are witnessing the, excuse me for saying it, the pathetic attempts of Europe to put innovation back on track, which usually is resulting these efforts either in more forms that you have to fill or more rules and regulations that you have to follow. And one thing is clear, just adding more money will not resolve the issue. There is something deeper than just funding. The thing I think it has to do with the culture of innovation at large. You have to rebuild the whole culture, and this is not a trivial thing. I don't want to elaborate because I will consume all their time. But
sure, okay, but red tape is one of the things you mentioned there. I definitely want to come back to that. Culture is a big word, and maybe we'll get a chance to unpack that. But I'll come to...
Maybe I will say one thing, and then...
Yeah.
If I ask anybody on the stage to give me the list of the 20 major people which influence innovation in the United States in the last 2 decades, everybody will be able to produce these 20 names in 1 minute. If I will ask the same thing to give the names in China, people will come very quickly with maybe 10 or 12 names, and you give them to think a little bit more, they will come with another just off the cuff. If I will ask you, give me the 20 leading enablers of innovation in Europe, you will come, I think, with 4 names, which shows you the gap, the huge gap between the enablers innovation. Innovation doesn't happen on its own. You need people which know how to create it, how to raise funds, how to recruit the talent, how to develop the talent.
Okay. Sure, okay, and that leads me on to a question that I hope we get time to go on to, which is about Europe's identity on the global stage as well. Okay, thank you for now, Yossi. Jackie, what's your take, perhaps on where Yossi expressed some of his views on the availability of capital, for example, in Europe? You at Cathay have just raised for a new fund. You invest 30-30-40 across USA, China and 40 in Europe. Just talk to me about your view on whether there is a lack of capital, or on where we are in terms of supporting startups in Europe.
First of all, I'll go back to the notion of ecosystem. If we look at, Yossi was talking about the US, we can talk about China as well, but what Europe is trying to build, and I think we're getting there, is the ecosystem. And the ecosystem is the full cycle where you have talent, where you have money, and when you have customers, and when you have scale. So my views on that is that what we're lacking in Europe is a notion of scale, because Europe itself, it's a fragmented market.
Yep.
So we always consider Europe as being, several hundreds of millions of inhabitants, but reality is, France, Germany, Spain, and so forth. We at Cathay, so we just raised a 1 billion euros fund. So for Europe, this is really one of the largest funds in Europe. But again, if you compare it to US funds, it's in the middle of, I wouldn't say nowhere, because actually that's a massive achievement, but still, to back some of these companies, you need more money. And this is where US funds come, and sometimes, they invest in the best companies in Europe. So there is the gap. Talking about the gap, which is the subject today, is also in capital. So being able to put not tens of millions, but hundreds of millions in dollars, euros in companies. So we're seeing a lot of efforts from EU, from the countries, so to invest massively. 3 weeks ago, there was the AI summit taking place in Paris. So they ended up with 2 announcements. I will talk one now and maybe later on about the second one. But one was an investment of 100 billions, 109 billions, so to be invested in France. In January, the US announced 500 billions. So that is, I think, just show that despite that we are going in the right direction, there is still this notion of scale. Okay. And for me, that is really the challenge that we as European, we have, which is, cultural thing, probably, but again, because we're not summing up the different countries, it's just a reality, it's a fragmented market.
Thank you. Peter, talk to me about Silo AI. Just give us a bit of specific context here. We've heard some big picture, global. We've heard some European perspective here. Just talk to me about your perspective here and what your experience has been with Silo AI, your experience in Helsinki, and what's happened over the last 12 months or so for you and your business.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, there's happened a lot in 12 months. There's happened a lot during the past 7 years. So we co-founded Silo as a private AI lab in 2017. I left the professorship with my research group, and then we've expanded that team to a group of around 300 leading AI researchers, majority PhDs in AI-related fields. And we grew to one of Europe's largest private AI labs. We're bootstrapped, originally bootstrapped and revenue funded. We've grown with customers. I think there's many paths to, eventually success, however you define that. We were acquired by AMD in Europe's largest AI acquisition last year.
Yep.
So I mean, we've seen Europe and we've experienced Europe as an environment. But we've also experienced sort of quite different environments in terms of market for AI, and I would say that's been really decisive for us.
And in terms of Helsinki as a hub for innovation, it does feel, we've spoken about the fragmentation when you look at Europe as a whole. What's been your experience, long experience, of the ecosystem in Helsinki? Why does it have this track record of success, and what's the vibe, what's the feels there right now?
So, and maybe to continue briefly on where I ended, I think my take on the market is that in 2017 the AI market was very immature. I think we took the right path. It wasn't really about sort of not having access to capital, but it was really about sort of how do you enter the market and how do you build a company in that market. But now, Helsinki, I think it's not entirely obvious that Helsinki would be an AI hub. I think Paris has done a great job in building out sort of a strong cluster, an ecosystem around an academic cluster where you have large companies investing in R&D and setting up their R&D labs. You have smaller startups eventually in the ecosystem, and you have, I think, the ingredients eventually. I mean, I think this is one way of tackling the fragmentation problem, that we should build these strong clusters. We have a few potential clusters that are growing. Zurich is one, Tübingen, where there's the first Ellis Institute, and actually the second leading AI research institute in Europe is in Helsinki, that was set up last year and that is growing at the moment. So Helsinki, I think, is fairly well positioned. We have also the strongest supercomputer in Europe that was built a few years back, yeah. And we're building at the moment the next strong supercomputer in Lumi.
I want to come back in a moment to you to talk about the contribution you made to an article in the Financial Times recently. So hold that thought about scaling across Europe. But Jackie, just coming back to the AI summit in Paris recently, what was your big takeaway from that? When we start saying, okay, so what good, what value, what do people take away back to their workplaces, back to their countries, their nations from the summit? What was your takeaway from it?
So a couple of them. One, positive towards what Europe is aiming at building. And the second one is, again, another challenge. So I'll talk about the positive one, and maybe on what Peter was saying, is basically the talent pool. Okay, and France itself is becoming one of the major talent pool, especially on researchers and engineers, and we are seeing that because US founders actually are coming into France to build companies in France to recruit talent equivalent to what you can have MIT or Stanford level, coming from Polytechnique, École Normale, and so forth. So that is for a French, say, a student, okay, a few years ago, the main goal was to go and work for a corporate. Okay, and this is why, I mean, France also has this network of very large corporates. Today, their objective in life is really to build a startup. So that is one of the very positive things about one of the takeaways. On the other hand, the second one is about regulation. Okay.
Yep.
Last year there was the AI Act with a lot of regulation. Okay. This year, governments, tried, to sign this pledge about ethical AI, which was not signed by all the countries. And again, we're talking about, something when it's a race, okay? We talked about how many investment are being poured into this sector, but at the same time, if you are too much regulated, is this sector too much regulated, then China and the US especially will go faster. And I think to find the right balance is still very challenging, and this is maybe what is adding some hurdles to go faster than the other countries.
And this brings me back to the point about identity of Europe, because we've spoken about Europe being a safe place. There have been AI summits in Paris, in the UK a year or so ago. I've lost track quite what happened in the UK over the last 12 or 18 months, but a big AI summit there as well. But this comes back to the point of identity. Yossi, you are desperate to share something with us on the subject of identity there, and you've got an image on your phone that I'm not sure we're going to be able to see on screen, but you read it out to us.
I will read it. It's more has to do with the issue of regulation.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm holding here an advertisement which reads as following. Pythagoras' theorem contains 24 words. I guess most of you are familiar with Pythagoras' theorem. Archimedes' principle of floating, 67 words. The Ten Commandments, 179 words. The American Declaration of Independence, 300 words. And legislation in Europe concerning when and where you can smoke, 24,942 words. So this is as far as regulation goes. I think that Europe is doing a great service to the United States and China by regulating itself to death.
All right. You mentioned, so first of all, you asked for the brutal, honest questions and responses here. Like a choose-your-own-adventure, my questions were kind of angled depending on which direction we go. So I'm going to go to this one. Peter, coming back to the contribution you made to that FT article a few months ago, it closed with a nod to the administration in the US, as was then incoming. And the article said Europe's position in the context of the threat of a more nationalistic US. 3 months on, Europe and the rest of the world are now coming to terms with the reality of that on a number of fronts, and we won't get too political there. But my closing question, maybe, let's see where it takes us, to you all, is the political and economical shockwaves that are coming from the US, and it's a developing story every day at the moment. Are they the shock that Europe needs to get its own innovation ecosystem pumping once again? Is it a case of maybe it's been too comfortable, maybe Europe hasn't had to make some of the choices? When its back is against a wall, it has to make stuff happen. So, can Europe stand on its own 2 feet, or is it too late? Peter, this was your part of your story.
So, I think the piece in the FT is great. Not attributed to me, attributed to John Thornhill, who is a good journalist. And I think he asked the question, is Europe becoming a museum? And my sort of tiny contribution to that piece was a comment related to, and not that much related to geopolitics, but related to the EU Inc. initiative that was launched last year. And that's a very specific one initiative. It's not enough, but it's, I think, a good start to ensure that the companies that are being set up in Europe, they're European companies, they're able to serve a European market. And I think sort of what's behind that is ultimately the big problem. And I think we've talked about talent, we've talked about capital, we've talked about in AI you need compute infrastructure and so forth. But ultimately, I think we have talent. I think capital is global. Eventually, good initiatives will find capital. I think we do need more ambition and culture, but I think the most important element in Europe is that there's no strong single market. It's an extremely fragmented market, and it's not at all obvious that you as a company in southern Italy, or you as a company in Sweden, or you as a company in France will be able to serve a European market. And I ultimately think that if we are to scale companies, if we are to build these, plus the previous talk mentioned plus 1 trillion companies, and if we're to build these large tech companies in Europe, Europe needs to sort of offer that market to scale in. Otherwise, you will not stay in Europe.
Yossi, I want to come to you on the culture point, because we've mentioned regulation. Europe is structurally conservative. That's kind of what we do, and you can look at the stereotypes of a European versus a West Coast US, break things quickly, move on, against China. You can fall into all the stereotypes, but we have a stereotype here in Europe. Sometimes those stereotypes aren't true, sometimes there are. Where do you see the identity and the culture in Europe, and what does that need to change in order to, say, kickstart the movement again here?
Okay, Europe, I think, suffer from much heavier moment of inertia. Things to get moved take a lot of time. They move slowly. You look on the 10 biggest European companies, most of them were created early 20th century, some of them in 19th century. The longest, I think, existing corporate is Bayer, if I'm not mistaken, which was created in 1700. And the culture, the culture is kind of lay back. While in China, the young generation is very dynamic, very inspired by their cultural, technological heroes, and same is in Silicon Valley. The drive to create new things exists in Europe, but not to the level that you have it in the United States and China. So Europe is in some kind of a coma, which they have to be waken up, and I don't know how to wake them up. Regarding your former question about the shockwaves of the new administration, I would like to add that if we go back to protectionist world, where each country is protecting its own manufacturing, yes, for sure, you will have to come with some innovations in order to be able to manufacture things which are not available for you anymore. But there is a ceiling, because in today's world, to get the best of any technology endeavor, you need parts and software and inputs from all over the world, like the best of breed. And if the best of breed is not available to you, there is no way that you will be able to create worldwide competitive products, and then again you will have to get protection. So you go into kind of a cycle which protectionism is increasing itself, and it's a lose-lose-lose proposition. But maybe, I guess that Trump is a president, maybe he knows something which I don't understand.
And it takes time to build up those supply chains as well. You can't spring up a fab facility in Europe in 6 months and expect to see.
Yeah, but it's not. It will be not only the problem of Europe. It will be the problem of the whole world.
We've got 4.5 minutes left, and I want to try and end on some positives here. We've spoken about minding or understanding the gap, about why the gap is there, about Europe in a coma, Europe as a museum, for example, a lot of red tape. We've touched on some of these already, but I want to try and end on some positives for our audience today. Maybe some people who can, as a result of our next 4 minutes, be on the front foot and try and be part of that change. So, Jackie, I want to come to you first of all. What would you like to see next to address some of the challenges that we've spoken about and to try and get some momentum rather than suffer from the inertia?
I would say, as a positive note, this fund we are currently investing with, so it's our third generation of fund.
Yep.
So Fund 1 and Fund 2 were 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 per geographies, US, Europe, and China. And why we decided to bet more on Europe in this third fund is because we are seeing the cycle of repeat entrepreneurs. And I think when Peter is saying and what Yossi is saying is that the scale, the ambition, the culture. So the early founders were, they were building something and then they were looking for an exit, probably an acquisition from an overseas company. Today, these repeat entrepreneurs are aiming to build. So we may not know all the names of 20 names that counts in Europe today, but we may have a few that some years from now, I don't know if 4 years from now, but a few years from now, they are trying to build something bigger and not selling. And we are seeing in our portfolio companies being, let's say, approached by US players, and some of them, because they are funded the second or third company, they're saying, no, now I want to be the one going to the US and maybe buy that competitor, which was the other way around a few years ago. So that is why we have decided to bet more on Europe. Okay. We talked about the talent, we talked about the size of the fund, but also the quality of the funders and the ambition. Then the rest is, no, I don't want to repeat what we said. There are challenges.
I'll come to you in just a second, Yossi. Peter, maybe you will be one of the names that people will list in their 10 or 20 European founders. What do you want to see happen next, in a nutshell?
So I think we need to understand that it takes time. And as Yossi puts these problems out, they aren't small, right? And it does take time. And we need to put it on a time scale that is realistic. There are some things that probably will take more time, like addressing the problems that Draghi has highlighted with the single market. I mean, he said all the way now a few weeks back that Europe needs to become a single state. Now, I don't know, but Europe has to solve the problem with the market, because if you are to build sort of significant scalable companies, then you need to address a large market. But I think we should focus today, Europe should focus on the talent ecosystem, the talent hubs that we already have and that were highlighted. Paris is one, Zurich is one, Tübingen could be one, Helsinki could be one. We have compute infrastructure, EuroHPC has been building out, but others have also been building out. We have the talent, and I think we have now also the possibility to attract capital. So I think, by building these ecosystems, and in many cases, Paris is an example, attracted Meta, attracted OpenAI, attracted other, say, US-based companies to set up their R&D centers, which again ensures that this talent eventually at some point sets up their own company and contributes to Europe.
Talent, talent, talent. Yossi, final word from you. What does Europe need to do next?
As I said yesterday, I suggested that Europe take the 95 or whatever $1 billion of Horizon, distribute it to 95,000 chunks of 1 million each, put half a page application form online, and any any guy who want to create startup, the first 95,000 get $1 million each, and after 5 years you will have at least 10,000 good startups in Europe. The very same thing which happened when Nokia exploded. I don't know how many startups were created in Finland, but I think it's over 1,000. So if you want to invest venture capital, you need to venture the capital. And I would, if I would be in charge of Horizon, I will call Peter and I will tell him, Peter, do me a favor, take $4 billion and manage it. And I'm not laughing. I think this will kickstart Europe in a big way. Probability that it will happen, I think it's 0%, but maybe, who knows?
I think many of the people here at 4 years from now this week would absolutely be behind your approach there, Yossi.
Who is for this suggestion? Raise your hand.
Yeah, I thought so. I thought so.
Like 5 people.
Definitely more than the conservative viewpoint that we had earlier on. But listen, thank you for showing your hands, for listening to the story as it is according to our panel. Your view may be different, and we'd be delighted to hear from those. Not right now, unfortunately. We don't have time for questions. We do have to wrap up for a break, though. So please join me in putting those hands together in appreciation for our panel, for Yossi, for Jackie, and for Peter. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for your insights.